Hello, everybody. My name is Saar Vandenbroucke. Thank you for joining us on this webinar. I will be talking to you today about the role of trade unions and its representatives on the work floor. But before I start talking about that, I want to quickly introduce the department I work for, because it's very important with regards to the training policy and the support we give to worker representatives. I manage a small team, the theory team of diversity counselors within the ABVV. For those who do not know what the ABVV is a socialist trade union in Belgium. In Belgium, we are the second largest trade union, and yeah, so we're quite large. We have more than 1 million members. So that's what I will be talking about first. Then I will move on to the role of worker representatives in training policy on the work floor. We have done a project on the role of the worker representatives, and I will talk very quickly about that. We will talk about why we think that worker representatives should be an intermediary on the work floor with regards to training policy. We will look at the involvement of worker representatives at the moment and the involvement they think they should have. We will talk about the access people have to training and the policy we can develop around that, because access, I think it's not a surprise, is not equal among workers. And to finish, we will identify some thresholds that exists, some leverage we can use in the future, and opportunities we have identified within the project. And of course, at the end, there will be room for questions. So, as I said, I manage a team of diversity counselors from the ABVV, as I said, a socialist trade union in Belgium. And we have the assignment, the counselors, to support worker representatives. So as such, we aren't worker representatives, but we support them within the context of the work floor. So we are not policymakers. We don't work on a higher level. We really work hands-on with worker representatives within the context of the work floor. We offer support around a broad range of topics. That can be discrimination, burnouts, quality of work, workplace innovation, workplace organization. I've put burnouts twice, probably because I thought it was very important. But we also offer support with regards to education and education policy on the work floor. We always work in cooperation with the secretary being the main point of contact of worker representatives, and we always aim for collective solutions. That's not because we don't think that individual support for individual employees is not important, but we have separate departments for individual support that are our career coaches and our career consultants. So we focus on collective problems and try to look for collective solutions. The aim is always to start a dialogue with the employer, because we believe that when you want to make changes on the work floor, you need the employer. We cannot take steps forward without the input and the collaboration of the employer. And our end game, our overall goal, is to improve work floor conditions and to improve the quality of life of employees. And as I said, that can be with regards to the topics I've mentioned before and much more. So how do we operate? I've mentioned that the trade union is Belgium. We work within a region of Belgium in Flanders. I've mentioned it before. Our work context is the work floor, so the organization level or the enterprise level. We offer tailor-made support, so we don't think that one size fits all. Every company, every enterprise has its own culture, has its own problems, has its own relations within the company, has its own way of dealing with things. So we don't have one method. We really try to offer tailor-made support to worker representatives. Another important issue is an important thing I want to raise is that we won't tell worker representatives which problems they have to tackle. They are in charge. So we offer support, but they are in charge and they decide and they think with us. We do have a fixed trajectory that we follow. It's kind of logical one, I think. And our support always starts with a short intake. We get to know the worker representative. He gets to know us, followed by an analysis of the company. What kind of employees work there? Are there men, mostly women? Older people, younger people, migration background, etc., etc., because that can be very important with regard to the action you want to undertake. And after the analysis, we look into which steps we can take to improve the problem that the work representative has encountered. So that's the action plan. Of course, as I mentioned before, we don't think that you can make change or sustainable change on the work floor without the collaboration of the employer. So we put up the action plan for discussion and start a social dialogue with the employer. Sometimes we also offer aftercare if the worker representative isn't sure or would like some more support. That's optional, but that's something we also offer. So that's the diversity department in Flanders. I think that the name diversity is still makes sense, but of course we offer a very broad range of topics and it goes beyond the scope of only diversity. So that is the diversity department. Within this department, we have, together with another department of career coaches, we have concluded a project with the assistance of the European Social Fund. And the aim of the project is to have a higher impact on training policy on the work floor. In Belgium, there are lots of legislation and a lot of agreements with regards to training policy, but they often remain on a higher level. And we really want to support worker representatives to have a higher impact on training policy, because as we will see later on, the impact on training policy by the trade unions is at the moment not as high as we would like. Within the project, and the title gives it away, there is a very specific link to 21st century skills, because we believe that those skills are necessary for the employees of the 21st century to acquire and to have a strong position on the labor market. So in the next slides, I will present you some findings that we have made. Those findings are based on legitimate research. We have conducted a survey among worker representatives. The University of Brussels has conducted interviews with some organizations, with both worker representatives, but also with the employer or HR, because we wanted the perspective of both the employee and the employer. So we thought that was very important. We have conducted some test cases in companies to try out the kind of support we would like to offer, and then we have also listened to experiences from trade unions in Norway and Germany, and that was also very interesting. Maybe first, the first question we should answer is, why do we think it's important that we as a trade union, as worker representatives, have an impact on training policy on the work floor? And why do we think they should act as an intermediary on the work floor? At the moment, and that's the legislation I was talking about, worker representatives do have leverage to have more impact on the work floor. There are collective labor agreements, there's regulation, and with regards to competence and training policies. So it is possible for worker representatives to influence training policies. However, it's not because the legislation or the leverage exists that it's also being used. And that's what we have noticed when we started this project. The powers that the worker representatives have, they don't use them or not sufficiently. And that's why we think it's very important that we offer support and that we make them aware of the fact that they have the powers and that they should use them. Why? Because we think it's important that people have access to training and that there is a healthy training policy available to everybody. I will come back to that later. And we think that everybody has a right to training, not only to empower your position on the work floor, but also to make you stronger if you should lose your job or if you would like to change jobs, to make you stronger on the labor market as a whole. So we think it's very important for worker representatives to use the leverage that they have and to try and influence training policy on the work floor to make it more accessible and also to make it more logical for employees. As I already, I think, alluded to, the involvement of the worker representatives at the moment exists. The survey indicated that at the moment, 15% of worker representatives says that they feel reasonably involved in the training policy on the work floor. That's an unfortunate low number. Because that means that the training and training policy is almost exclusively in the hands of the employer. There's nothing wrong with an employer who organizes training and has a training policy, but we do think that the voice of the employee with regards to training policy should also be heard. And the 15% indicates that today that's not always the case. However, and that's good, our worker representatives are not involved at the moment, but they are very motivated to be more involved. When we started the survey and when we did the interviews, a lot of worker representatives were not aware of the possibilities, of the powers that they have, of the leverage they can use. And when they heard that that's possible, 80% expressed a wish to get involved and to be more involved in having an impact on training on the work floor. Even a more important or an equally important number is that worker representatives are very convinced of the importance of, I made a little mistake there, they're very convinced of the importance of training, which is good. There is no apathy there. Our worker representatives recognize the importance of training and they think they should be more involved. So the motivation is there and the willingness to do more is most certainly there. When we started the survey, of course, we wanted to know what the situation is at the moment. So we asked our representatives, what's the reality on the work floor at the moment? What kind of training does your employer offer? And you can see here, and maybe I should indicate that's the yeah, okay. No, you can see here that the main topic is safety and ergonomics. That's the most important training that is being offered on the work floor. These are trainings that very often are compulsory. So the employer has to have them, has to offer them. For example, in the food industry, there are compulsory trainings with regards to hygiene, or in hospitals or care houses. You have to comply with certain regulations with regards to CPR. So those are safety and ergonomics trainings, and these are the most offered trainings by the work floor. Others, the second ones are job-specific skills. These are, for example, trainings that are offered when, for example, the employer introduces a new system of digitalization, and it comes with the training. or the education of nurses within a hospital. That's also very job specific, or a new kind of tool that's being introduced. So very job specific skills that are really very useful, and those trainings should be offered, but their usefulness is limited to the job at hand. Another important one is the use of digital technologies. So there's an important link to 21st century skills there. And then on the 4th and the 5th place, you see social skills, and on the 5th place, well-being. So that's general well-being on the work floor. That's with regards to work pressure, general well-being, work-life balance, having good relations with your manager, with your colleagues. And then we see some other trainings that are rather low when we look at what's being offered to employees on the work floor. So problem solving and process improvement, personal development, social media use, language lessons, quite low. We do have a large community of persons with a migration background, so we're a little bit surprised. Communication skills, and then advanced technology. So that's the reality on the work floor. And then we asked our worker representatives, okay, that's the reality, but what do you think that the needs are on the work floor? What do you think that you and your colleagues need the most with regards to training? And then we see on the first place, well-being, and on the second one, social skills, and on the third one, job-specific skills. So we do see that worker representatives recognize that job-specific skills are important. Of course they are, but they place a higher importance on well-being. And they also see that the attention in training policy on well-being is not high enough. The same goes for social skills. And then when we look at the other trainings that are offered on the work floor, we see kind of the same trainings, but the need for safety and ergonomics is fifth. That's of course not because they don't think it's important. It's certainly important, but well-being being equally or even more important, but yeah, severely lacking in the offer of the training policy on the work floor. So there's a big difference in the top three of education offered versus education needed. And then the last one with regards to training on the work floor, we also asked the workers' representatives why they think that the employer offers a certain training and education. So the main reason, according to the representatives, is to improve employee skills, to increase capacity, so increase production of the organization is considered very important by the employer, as you can see, less important by the representative. Also to organize work more efficiently, again, to improve employees' well-being. Representative thinks that's a very good reason to offer education. Employers think it's also important, but much less so. Preparing employees for new tasks. And as you can see, there's quite a difference of opinion of why trainings should be offered between the representative and the employer. So there's a gap between the needs of the employer, the needs of the employee, and the reasons why you should offer training. So there is some gap between employee and employer and worker representatives, and that's something that we should work on. Another very important one, and I think a very painful one, is it's very obvious in Belgium, and we have scientific figures to prove that. And I can imagine it's the same in other countries. The lack of equal access to education and training. There's a very large group of rather vulnerable employees that who need education more and have less access to education. You can see at the top of the slide that short-skilled, middle-skilled workers are more vulnerable on the work floor. Workers with outdated knowledge, workers with digital barriers, they have there's certain position that they have on the labor market, which makes them a little bit weaker than other employees. In Flanders, there's overall high-skilled or low-skilled, there is overall a low educational participation and a very strong underrepresentation with, again, people with little schooling, older employees, and employees with a migration background. And these are just a few of the groups that have lower access. There is also the group of single-parent households, persons with psychological issues, and well, there are very different kind of groups that have less access to education. And we see that the group of people who most need training, who are the least reached. So that's something we really have to take into account. We really have to be vigilant about that those groups need more access to training. Of course, there is a reason that we think so. We don't think training is important just for the fun of it. If you don't have access to training, you develop a learning deficit. For example, you don't develop the 21st century skills, and that can lead to lower employability, or it can also lead to jobs with lesser quality of work, less workable jobs, and you have a less chance to keep your job. So access to education, equal access to education and training is something that we have to take into consideration and that we really have to work on, because at the moment the figures are not good. Based on the survey and the interviews and the project we have done, we have made some analysis, and we have concluded we have made some conclusions with regards to education and training policy. And we want to, at the moment, we recognize that in Flanders, the situation is not ideal. Work representatives are not as involved as they should be. The training that is offered isn't always the training that is needed. The reasons why training is offered aren't always what we think is important. There is unequal access to education. So there's a lot of room for growth, and we as a trade union, we want to tackle that. So we try to identify the most important powers and the most important things we can focus on to make sure that gradually the situation can improve. So the important levers that we have identified are more attention, makes sense, I think, to short-skilled workers, to non-native speakers, and workers with a migration background. Very often you can also, it's roughly speaking, of course, I am aware of that, but there is also the gap between blue-collar workers and white-collar workers. I think it's no surprise to all of you when I say that blue-collar workers have less access to training and less access to training suited for them. For them, it's very often a job-specific training versus white-collar people who have more access to all kinds of training. So something that we think that can improve is the identification of your own needs versus identification by a supervisor. What we saw is that with lower skilled workers or blue-collar workers, it's often your supervisor who decides what kind of training that you need. versus when we looked at white-collar workers or workers in higher positions, they were more often able to identify their needs and also to suggest the kind of trainings they wanted to follow. So we think that we can, for certain groups, we can encourage them to take matters more into their own hands, and instead of letting the supervisor unilaterally decide what kind of training that you need, that to make you reflect about your own needs and also be vocal about them. Another one that we want to tackle is a lower threshold for training. Should be training, not train. At the moment, trainings aren't always organized with the public in mind. So a lot of worker representatives told us that people are discouraged from following training because it isn't suitable for them. So we think that training should be given with your public in mind, and that it should be given in a language that they understand, maybe even given by colleagues, and not and to make it more accessible that way. Another thing we can do to make training more attractive for certain groups is to offer incentives. Those can be financial incentives, that can be other incentives, but some little pull factor to motivate people to follow training. That's one part that we think that we can take on. Another one is that what we concluded is that training is also a part of well-being. So in our research and our survey, we discovered that enterprises or organizations where they invested a lot in the training of all people, that it had an influence on the well-being of people. People felt more valued. They thought they were important to the company, and it increased their overall well-being. Another important aspect of training is that it has a social dimension. I think Corona has been, or COVID-19 has been, a global issue. So I think everybody here has been affected by it. And what our respondents mentioned is that e-learning can have its place in the training policy, but that the social aspect of training, physical training, is also very important. People felt motivated, people felt inspired, and they felt it was some kind of form of team building, and they of course didn't have that feeling when they were offered e-learning. So physical training can have a social aspect too, and can also improve your overall well-being, actually. So other important leverage that we can use are, of course, our worker representatives. From the survey, which was very long, and I am sorry I cannot present you with all the results because it's very interesting, but our worker representatives indicated that although they're interested in the training and training policy, and that they are motivated to have more impact on training policy, is that they didn't feel informed enough with regards to training regulation, training possibilities. So that's a responsibility that we as organization, as trade union, have to take, is that we have to inform our representatives, or at least we have to make sure that they know where they can go within our organizations if they have questions or if they need support. So these are important things that we can take on. But of course, there are also some thresholds that we have identified and which may hinder a higher impact of a healthy training policy on the work floor. The first one, a very important one, is that the employer or the organization has an overly narrow and organization-centric training perspective. Very often, training policy is regarded as something that has to add value to the organization and not something that has to add value to the individual employee. And that's something that we think that may hinder a healthy training policy, because of course it's important for the organization that training adds to the productivity, and that's fine. We don't disagree with that, but it shouldn't be the only reason that training is offered. The other aspects, as we saw before, like well-being, like developing your own talents, like developing your digital skills, communication skills, those are also important. And those are undervalued at the moment because they're a very narrow view of what is a good training policy. Another one that makes sense, but is, in our view, a little bit short-sighted, that is that training is viewed purely as a cost and not as a win. So training, of course, and giving training can cost money, and also training hours are hours that an employee does not work. So it's sometimes also it can put pressure on the team if one person of the team follows training. So training is viewed as a cost. This can also be a threshold to have to develop a more healthy training policy on the work floor. And then the last one is a lack of motivation from the employees themselves. Of course, we don't think that people aren't motivated just because they don't like learning. We do think that people lack motivation because they have, for example, bad experience with learning, be it from the high school or be it from trainings that weren't suited to what they needed. So that's a very important threshold, and when we certainly have to tackle, because if you don't have motivated employees and you don't have the suitable training for them, then it will be difficult to make them motivated, and it will be difficult for the worker representative to motivate and inspire his colleagues to follow training. We do think that there's no such thing as not wanting to follow training, but we do think that it's the lack of, as I said, suitable training or maybe bad experiences. But I think most people want to learn. You just have to find the way that is that matches their way of learning. So that's also a threshold that you can encounter if you try to improve training policy on the work floor. Then the last one, that's the role of the worker representative and how he can seek opportunities to improve training policy on the work floor. We think it's very important that the worker representative starts to present itself as some kind of bridge figure between employer and employee. It's of course, he is of course in the first place an advocate of the employees. That goes without saying, but he can also function as a bridge figure and take on the role of some kind of proponent of education and a healthier education policy. What is needed? A strong umbrella union. What does that mean? It means that a worker representative often lacks. A worker representative shouldn't be an island. He has to know, I've mentioned it before, where he can go within the union to ask for support, to ask for expertise. So you need a strong organization in which the worker representative is embedded. So you need experts with regards to education, and he or she has to find a way to that, to the experts and the expertise. What we also can do is to train the worker representative himself. So we should, but we already educate our worker representatives, but we should also educate them on the topic of training policy and how they themselves can have more impact, because that's what we noticed, a lack of knowledge. And what is also healthy, if you want to have more impact on training policy, that's to have a connected attitude towards the employer. If you see the employer as the enemy, you won't go very far. but if you display an attitude of openness and wanting to cooperate, which isn't always easy, I do recognize that, but we noticed from an interview, for example, an HR manager who said, if they lack the knowledge, how can we learn together? So it's very important that the work representatives has an open attitude and an open mind, and those are opportunities that we identified for the worker representative. So to conclude, I think that we have the past few years and the past 5-6 years that we have identified the need for a better training policy within the context of work floors. I'm not talking about national or regional level, but work floor. And that we have to educate our work representatives to have more knowledge and to make them aware of the leverage they have to have the impact on training policy. We have to make sure that the correct kind of training is offered next to the training that the employer think is important. We have to be vigilant about equal access to training, and we have to make sure that our worker representatives are knowledgeable and that they know within the organization where they can ask their questions. If there are any more questions, I will be happy to answer them.